Well, earlier this week, the White House said it was going to have diplomatic talks with Hamas for the first time. So we were optimistic that, okay, this is what President Trump said, that if we want to make a deal with Russia and Ukraine, you have to talk to both sides. You can't demur both sides. He said while sitting with Zelensky, I can't say bad things about Russia and then get him to the table, just like I'm not going to go to Russia and say bad things about Zelensky. I'm going to play diplomatically. So we thought, oh, maybe that's how he's going to play it with Israel. Well, not so much. Here is how that went. He posted this just yesterday. Shalom Hamas means hello and goodbye. You can choose. Release all the hostages now, not later, and immediately return all of the dead bodies of the people you murdered, or it's over for you. Only sick and twisted people keep bodies, and you are sick and twisted. I am sending Israel everything it needs to finish the job. Not a single Hamas member will be safe if you don't do as I say. I've just met with your former hostages whose lives you destroyed. This is your last warning for the leadership. Now is the time to leave Gaza while you still have a chance. Also to the people of Gaza, a beautiful future awaits you. You can read the rest. It's in all caps. Well, Israel also has dead bodies to exchange. They have had since long before October 7th. Does he not know this? Or does this come, as many say, that Trump is influenced by the last person he has spoken with? Well, we saw that he spoke with the families of Israeli hostages. He spoke with no families of Palestinian hostages. There are more opportunities for him to have met with. There are far more Palestinian hostages than Israeli, but he chose not to meet with them. So what's going on here? Dan Cohen has covered the war in Gaza for years, long before October 7th. He actually had a fairly optimistic take on this when this tweet sent me into a downward spiral. Dan, explain what you think may be going on here, and in a more, I don't know,
level-headed way.
Yeah, level-headed way than I am able.
Well, I mean, trying to parse Trump's tweets and posts and actions can make a fool out of you. So I want to be careful that I'm not saying this is definitely what's happening. But I mean, we know that Trump has anti-interventionist instincts. We know that, even going back to his first presidency with North Korea, there was all the talk about fire and fury, and then he ended up meeting with Kim Jong-un and walking across the DMZ. He met with Putin, which was something that Biden didn't do. So we know he has diplomatic anti-interventionist instincts. And we, of course, see what's happening with Ukraine, Russia, that he's bringing that to a close. And we saw, they pulled the curtain back when Zelensky went at Trump and J.D. Vance, and Trump wanted the American people to see what Zelensky was doing. As he said, you don't have the cards. You're playing with World War III. I think that Trump knows the same thing is happening here, that there could be a massive war with Iran, which, well, Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. A war with Iran would destroy the region, specifically the U.S. military and energy infrastructure in Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia. It would not go well for anyone, and he knows that Israel is trying to drag him into that. And so that message came actually the very same day that we learned from leaks from the Israeli media, leaked to the Israeli, or actually perhaps from spying on the Trump administration, that there are direct talks between the Trump administration and Hamas, which is unprecedented diplomacy from a U.S. administration. Obviously, Biden didn't do that. It has never happened before. So that's a very positive sign, because if Trump was really intent on wiping out whatever's left of Gaza, then he would just do it. So I sense that there's kind of a bit of a game going on. If you look back even to February, he said that the U.S. was going to take over Gaza and expel all of the Palestinians, right? Just going to take it. First he said, we'll buy it, then we'll take it, then we're going to rebuild it for whoever we put in there. Obviously, the U.S. is not going to send in its military to fight Hamas and occupy Gaza. But that certainly pumped up Netanyahu, strengthened his image in the Israeli public. It strengthened Trump's image in the Israeli public. It was like, wow, finally Trump's going to ethnically cleanse Gaza for us. Then he said Hamas has to release all of the hostages on February 15th. On February 11th, he said that. On February 15th, Hamas released 3 hostages, and Trump did not do anything about that. He didn't, make anything of those threats. And then that takes us to this week, where he says that where we find out that he's actually sidestepped Netanyahu to have these talks with Hamas. So that, I think, pretty clearly demonstrates that he knows Netanyahu, who he posted that video, remember, of course, of Jeffrey Sachs.
Right.
Saying
I keep going back to that as like, okay, but he knows, right?
Yeah, where he called Netanyahu a deep, dark son of a bitch. Like, he posted Jeffrey Sachs's video. And I have it on good authority that Trump does not like Netanyahu. I'll say it again. He's not a fan of Netanyahu. So, like, yeah, I guess it's all theater, it seems like, right? Or he's putting stuff out on social media for theatrical purposes. What's going on behind the scenes is very different, perhaps.
That's what it looks like to me, because he's, his rhetoric is one thing, but there are negotiations going on behind the scenes. And, Steve Witkoff, his Middle East envoy, who basically went to Qatar and told Netanyahu, sign the ceasefire in order, right before Trump took office, he's holding direct talks with Hamas. So he's saying, that Hamas can't be a part of any future Palestinian government. Well, I don't know that Hamas necessarily itself says it has to be a part of it. I'm not saying they don't, but I mean, ultimately, what they're trying to do is get a state of their own, is end the siege on Gaza, rebuild, and this kind of thing, and basically have a state. Now, Hamas is an acronym in Arabic for Islamic Resistance Movement, is what it means in English. So it's a resistance movement. If it doesn't have anything to resist, then it's not really needed anymore. They're not resisting for no reason. They're resisting because of what Israel has been doing to them for decades. So if Hamas gets basically its core demands, an end to the siege, the rebuilding of Gaza, et cetera, what it's been clear about, the release of its prisoners, what it's been clear about from the very start, from basically October 8th and even before, its reason for existence, then there can be some kind of negotiated outcome. But that's what I think is going on here.
Can I ask you about these protests in the streets? So Israelis are not happy with Netanyahu. Maybe he's very popular, maybe he's not, I don't know, but there are protests in the streets of Tel Aviv calling and demanding an investigation into October 7th. Why was there 7 to 8 hours where the Israeli army stood down and basically let this attack unfold on purpose? And so the Israeli people want answers on this question. Why did they stand down? The same way here in America, I want to know why we knew about 9/11 beforehand. We had Operation Able Danger. We knew all about it. We knew all about it, and we allowed it to happen. So why did they allow October 7th to happen? So talk about these protests and where Netanyahu sits with the Israeli people right now.
Well, there's a huge amount of anger, and has been since October 7th, in the Israeli public against Netanyahu, the entire security establishment. And I think, there is a sort of possibly a conspiratorial element that Israel or Netanyahu and, some others deliberately allowed it to happen. I mean, I don't think we haven't seen the smoking gun. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence of that. But the thing is that I think is maybe even bigger is that there's sort of an Israeli blindness to what was going on in Gaza, because they really believed we can just pay these people. We'll pay Hamas to basically shut up, and they don't want war. They don't want to go to war with us because of our overwhelming military power and all the lessons we've taught to them again and again. And it's very typical of this kind of blindness. I think is very typical. It's happened repeatedly in 2000 when Ariel Sharon went to the Temple Mount, the Al-Aqsa compound, and all the security chiefs except for the head of the police in Jerusalem said, no, nothing will happen. And what happened? There were clashes that day at the Al-Aqsa compound, and then the second Intifada broke out, and how many 1,000, 2,000 people, Israelis were killed, and Palestinians, of course, too. Same thing happened in 1973 with what the Israelis call the Yom Kippur War, where Israeli intelligence completely bungled their assessment. And so it's the same thing happening over and over. And, you know, if you look at actually the statements that Hamas was putting out, not only the statements, but the military exercises that they were doing in Gaza openly and putting out videos of it, it's like, of course it was going to happen. It's just that the Israelis are completely blind to what's happening in Gaza. They ignored that Palestinians were training with those fan, packs that they used to fly over, that they were doing marine exercises in the water. They were doing like exactly what they were going to do on October 7th, what they ended up doing. They were putting out statements in the days, weeks, months, and years ahead of time saying, if you Israelis do not stop doing X, Y, and Z, then there's going to be an explosion. We are completely prepared for it. They said it so many times, but the Israelis just ignored it. So there's on top of this complete blindness and ignorance to what Palestinians, Hamas were saying, then there's this aspect, well, did the security establishment or Netanyahu, or was there a conspiracy in the Israeli establishment to allow this to happen? Because then that would give them the pretext to carry out the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, and then it would, then they hoped they would be able to take over the whole thing and build settlements and everything they'd been wanting to do for years.
Yeah, there's a layer of did they allow it to happen, but also a layer of total incompetence and a failure to protect even if they didn't allow it. So there should be an investigation. I mean,
right,
you can
and
take
the
both
next
of them as an
layer, did
investigation.
they also blow it up and fire on their own people? And then killed their own people. Yeah.
So like this to me, I would, if this happened in America, I would absolutely want an investigation. So I can see why the Israeli people are pissed at Netanyahu.